Good morning. We have about 40 people registered for the webinar today, and where people are just joining, so we'll wait a moment more to gather a few more folks in before we get started. Okay, well, welcome to today's meeting of Canadian Religious Investors. My name is Peter Chapman, and I am a senior advisor at Share. Share has been convening meetings of religious investors in Canada for almost 15 years now, following in the footsteps of the Task Force on the Churches and Corporate Responsibility. Our network continues to grow and evolve, and we are also connected to an international network of faith-based investors that includes the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility in the US and the Church Investor Group in the United Kingdom. So it's a truly global movement. As you can see from the agenda, we have 3 presentations today and hopefully lots of time for questions and discussions. I would like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging, if you could advance to the next slide, that I am participating from the traditional territory of the Coast and Straits Salish people, specifically the Lekwungen peoples known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Today's participants in the webinar are joining us from coast to coast, and I encourage you to enter your own land acknowledgement in the chat section of the webinar. Also, feel free to introduce yourselves. We had planned to do a go-around and have everyone introduce themselves, but the number of people on the webinar is larger than we expected. So I encourage you to later in the webinar during discussion and questions, if you have a question or comment, to identify yourself before when you start to speak. Some people were unable to attend today, so we are recording the webinar and we'll make it available through a link on the Share website. And we'll also send you a follow-up email with links to any resources that people mention. And if you have any questions or issues around the webinar, if you can just type them in the chat, we'll monitor that to make sure you can stay connected with us. So with that beginning, I'd like to head into our first presentation. It's about building a 100% impact investment portfolio, and our presenters are Tafa Bird, the Chief Financial Officer of the Ursulines of Chatham, Sister Noreen Belosari Walsh, the Canonical Treasurer of the Ursulines, and the consultant who helped them, Adam Spence from SVX. So they have a presentation for us, and then we'll have time for some questions and to share our own experiences along that line. So I'll turn it over to you, Tafa and Sister Noreen. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks very much, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right, everyone can see the slide. All right, thank you, Peter. As Peter had said, I'm Tafa Bird, the Chief Financial Officer for the Ursuline Sisters of Chatham, And what we want to do today is just share with you about the impact journey that the Ursuline sisters went on. And it's been now, about 2 or 3 years. And we just want to share our experience. So I think Sister Noreen will get us started.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And hi again, everyone. Great to be with you. So we, the Ursuline sisters, incorporated into our chapter mandate of November 2021 the following statement. The leadership will encourage the community's efforts to continue its mission as women of the gospel, responding to needs of the time, including through the further use of resources in impact investing. But just as a little history prior to that, in July 2021, even before chapter, our investment committee held our first meeting with Adam Spence, hi Adam, from Social Venture Connection, who presented to us the Impact Investing Primer. We had a desire to move the regular investment portfolio towards impact investing to generate financial returns alongside substantial social and environmental impact returns. This was the committee's first step in gathering a better understanding of what impact investing was and how we could possibly move our portfolio towards impact. Important key factors of consideration were ensuring capital preservation, needed cash flow for annual expenses, and generating long-term growth for future expenses. Doing this all while aligning with the organizational mission of our Ursuline community.
We didn't meet again with SVX until April of 2022. And the purpose of this meeting was to discuss the engagement of SVX, to look at opportunities to transition the investment portfolio to impact investments. The portfolio could be divided using a multi-manager strategy, or it could be segmented by asset class. The committee would have to have regular monthly meetings, and documentation of the responses would be noted, and there would also be a lead person on each side, and this person would be very involved on each side. In May of 2022, we held a project kickoff meeting, and the purpose of that meeting was to review our goals. We detailed our work plans, discussed key deliverables. We talked about the assessment process. We reviewed the contract, and we had a discussion on our next steps.
So we began phase 1 in June 2022, which included an education and discovery workshop. The group was asked to think of some suggestions around themes such as women's issues, Indigenous and reconciliation issues, and environmental through Laudato Si. In July 2022, SVX held their workshop with the committee and the leadership circle. And the purpose was an impact prioritization workshop. This was the starting point to define our impact themes, which began with a look at the Sustainable Development Goals and what was important to us as Ursulines. Through a whiteboard exercise, we concluded 4 areas of concern to develop our themes.
In September of 2022, the investment committee met because we wanted to clarify what it was that we wanted our sisters to walk away with from an upcoming October presentation. We wanted them to understand a bit more about impact investing and to feel confidence in the investment committee and the SVX work. We wanted transparency with what the committee was doing while keeping that feeling that the committee was engaged in the process. Drawing that thread so they understood the connectiveness between chapter and where we were at now. To learn that this was a way to continue our involvement in ministry. In October, the workshop was presented to the larger Ursuline community, which included a project overview and introductions to the investment themes. The suggested themes presented were to represent the Ursuline's vision for a better world and act as a guide in assessing future investment opportunities. The themes chosen by the Ursulines were equity, access and empowerment, Indigenous reconciliation and prosperity, development, justice and peace, and protecting and conserving the earth.
Moving into November 2022, together with SVX, there was an in-depth review of our RFP, which included organizational investment goals and objectives, discussion of certain questions prepared to paint a comprehensive picture of what we are asking for, and a review of the proposed timeline. The committee discussed moving forward in a transitional mode with 100% being in impact over a few years. Would it be a percentage of the assets, or by asset class, or by dollar value? We were not sure at that point. During this time, the committee worked at updating our IPS to include recommendations from SVX. Since there was a change in our emphasis on impact investing, we needed to include language to reflect that change. Some of the changes focused on defining proactive investments for change. We added the definition of ministry investments. We updated language with the themes. We introduced sector limits and removed the Sustainalytics criteria. This criterion came from a viewpoint of do no harm, but moving into a portfolio of doing good, such restrictions are covered and reflected in the document. The committee agreed that the IPS is a living document, and changes would need to be made as we move towards the impact portfolio. Our revised IPS was sent to the leadership circle and approved in December 2022 to be included with the RFP. And also, during the month of November 2022, formal notice was given to our current investment council that the Ursulines would solicit by means of an RFP from a selected group for the position of investment manager in early 2023.
In December of 2022, the RFP was finalized for distribution. The request for proposal was scaled down to be more focused to include wording from the investment policy statement to parallel the documents. From there, a draft timeline was then drawn up. In January 23, the RFP was solicited to 10 Canadian firms and 6 US firms. By mid-February of 2023, 9 Canadian firms indicated their intent to submit a proposal. no U.S. firms responded. By the proposal deadline, only 8 firms submitted proposals. Following the submission deadline in early March of 23, SVX conducted the preliminary review of the proposals, and they categorized the firms based on consideration of a full mandate or a partial mandate. An evaluation scorecard was used in reviewing the submissions, which were consolidated into 5 equally weighted categories. After a thorough review of the proposal materials, it was decided that 2 of the firms, including our own investment manager, would not advance to the next round of interviews. This left 6 firms to be interviewed, and in the end, 1 of those firms did not confirm the interview time.
During the month of April 2023, SVX and the committee worked at developing general questions and priority questions that would be asked of each of the firms, and initial interviews were set up. An evaluation scorecard with the general and specific questions was prepared, and following each interview, we ranked the answers based on a scale of 1 to 5. In May 2023, the committee reviewed the results of the interviews based on the scoring mechanism. This allowed the committee to rank the 5 firms interviewed and to determine the final shortlist.
At this point, the committee was looking at the possibility of 2 managers, and the firms would be asked to respond based on a full mandate for all assets as originally shared in the request for proposal, with only 1 firm, and a partial mandate with a balanced portfolio across asset classes. The transition process became an important factor at this point, and we wanted the firms to explain how that would work. In June of 2023, we had a second interview with 2 of the firms.
In August 2023, a recommendation was made to our Ursuline leadership on the new investment manager and the strategy moving forward. The committee discussed how the portfolio would be divided between the 2 firms and what mandate they would be given for asset allocation. Both organizations were mandated with the current asset allocation mix of 60% fixed income and 40% equities, all in impact investments, some pooled funds, some segregated funds. We also requested that the assets be transferred in kind, and once transferred, the committee worked with the new managers in next steps. A kickoff meeting was set with SVX, the Ursulines, and both firms to work collaboratively through what our next steps would be and how the transition would work.
As of now, SVX is still engaged with the Ursulines. They were involved in the transition meetings with us, and there'll be a sounding board for any questions over the next 6 months. SVX also wants to do a case study in the future. At this point, we're still in that transition mode, but all accounts and paperwork and custodians have been established under the new firms, and the in-kind assets are being transferred to the new primary manager, who will then transfer the portion mandated to the other manager. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and it just gives you a little insight into the timeline and the steps that were involved to get us from beginning to think about what impact investing was, and transitioned over to 100% impact investments in about a 2-year period. Now I'll turn it back to you, Peter. Now I'll stop the share.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for that very clear presentation. As you were talking, I remembered that a pension fund trustee from one of the big New York City employees pension plans once said that they met with an investment manager, and the manager's comment was, he said, "You're difficult money." And what he meant by that was that the pension plan was looking for more from their investment manager than short-term financial returns. And the manager was a little unsure that he actually wanted to have what was not only difficult money, but a difficult client. So it was very interesting that you had relatively few proposals come back. Did you ever feel, as you were going through this process, that you might not be able to find a manager that would meet your financial hurdles and your impact hurdles? Did you waver?
No, I don't think that we did. It was actually a selection, like they were targeted managers. We were only looking to work with those who could provide us with impact. Maybe Adam, you could add a little bit to that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and also an entirely fair statement at the beginning, at the outset. We've certainly seen that with other asset owners that have similar experiences of being delightfully difficult as mission-focused investors. But I think what we did at the outset, as we were doing research and education, was make sure we scoped the market first to be able to identify and prove and test the case of, are there enough manager options that could be considered for Ursulines? So even before the RFP went to market, we scoped and looked at the market and who would be possible, so that there'd be comfort and confidence going forward to be able to issue an RFP. And then, as was said, we looked at, there were about 16 or so different managers, both US and Canada, to choose from. I think increasingly there are smaller, more boutique and growing firms or portfolio managers that offer that service. And then also mainstream financial institutions that are trying to integrate it within their strategy. And so two things can happen there. One is there can be a dedication of assets to those that are really focused, but also more investors that present these opportunities hopefully will pull more existing mainstream managers to be able to offer high impact opportunities and impact management solutions for a larger portion of their clients. And so in that way, folks like the Ursuline sisters can help move the market and move the system, so there'll be more solutions available for a larger audience.
Thanks, Adam. I can't see everyone all on my screen, and so if you have your hand raised to ask a question, or you're just hoping to ask a question, I'm not able to recognize you, so I'm going to invite you just to jump in with your questions. But if you can also raise your hand if you want. Hopefully I'll be able to see that. But does anyone have any questions? Anne-Marie?
I was just wondering what the size of the portfolio was for the Ursuline sisters.
Do you want to answer that, Noreen?
I certainly can. It was verging on 40 million.
So it wasn't peanuts, and it really is all that the Ursuline sisters have left. We've divested ourselves over the years of all of our property, all of our assets, and the sisters are no longer physically able to do ministry. So for us, it was to engage them to feel they could still do ministry, but what we have is all we have to take care of the community into the future. So it was very important that we made wise decisions along the way.
Yes,
Other,
sorry, Peter, just to add to what Taffa was saying, and I think we were confident that we could preserve what we needed, plan ahead and preserve what we needed, and then be generous with what we wanted to do with impact investing. So we have been confident about that. Things have been managed very, very well, and we are confident into the future. So that's where it's at.
okay. Other questions?
Hi,
Bill.
Tafa and Sister Noreen. Thank you so much for that wonderful, very clear presentation. I was really moved by the 4 impact themes that you came up with: the equity, access, and empowerment, Indigenous reconciliation and prosperity, and the others as well. Curious, how did your community gatherings with the wider congregation go? Was there a lot of kind of interest, or was it kind of hard to stimulate that discussion? And my second question is, how satisfied do you feel with the managers that you've gone with, that they are kind of tailoring their offerings to those themes? And I'm particularly curious around Indigenous reconciliation and empowerment. Thank you.
Do you want to do the first question, Noreen?
Sure, I can jump in. Thanks for the question. Yeah, we were actually really grateful and quite thrilled by the level of interest in our community and those that were able to attend the educational sessions. The community has always had a high level of involvement, a high level of engagement, and so we wanted a real sense of common ownership of these themes. And they were built on what has been our history of mission and of ministry. So they didn't come out of the blue, but they were built and they were refined based on what we have been doing. So Tafa, do you want to add your experience there?
Yeah, and we really felt that it was important to continue to engage the community in developing these themes. At the end of the day, the portfolio itself is the sisters' money. So to have them participate helps them to recognize that as well. Now, to the second part of your question there, Bill, we're very confident in the 2 managers that we've chosen. One manager is getting a substantially larger portion of the portfolio as compared to the other firm. And part of the reason for that is because the one firm can really focus in on our themes, and their proposals and all the meetings that we've had with them are about our themes and how they can invest in those areas. Now, as far as the other company, they did acknowledge our themes and they want to work with our themes. And in fact, they are doing something with Indigenous reconciliation, which was of real interest to us. But they also have funds that they've developed that are aligned with our themes. So we felt that that was a good fit as well. So it's a bit of each, a bit of one company with a larger portion focusing just on our themes, and the other one smaller portion where we're purchasing into the funds they already have that align. Did you have something to add, Adam?
Well, it's a great question. I think there's, again, increasing sophistication, although there is a divergence in kind of statement around commitment to Indigenous reconciliation versus ability for portfolio managers to execute. And so there is, as we know, a small number of public companies or fixed income product on the public markets that are owned or led by Indigenous entrepreneurs or organizations. And so I think one manager in particular has developed some very sophisticated data tools, also requirements for information gathering as well as commitments in terms of the investees they have within their portfolio and how they engage in reconciliation and relationship building and development efforts with and alongside First Nations and Indigenous communities in Canada. So I think it was very much a question that was asked throughout the process of, so you have a commitment to reconciliation, how are you delivering on it? I think, again, from the perspective of what do you need to ask your manager on a quarter by quarter or annual basis, that very question I think is really important of how you're delivering on that mandate and showing that they're able to kind of prove that they're meeting that. So really, really great and important question.
Well, that's a terrific segue into the next section of our meeting, which is to hear a little bit about some of the ongoing manager engagements that we have been facilitating at Share, that bring clients together who share a common manager to talk together about that. And so we have Derek Hurst, manager of the United Church of Canada Pension Plan, and Hugh Letourneau, Associate Director of Responsible Investment Leadership at Share, to tell us a little bit about how they work together on a specific project of engaging one manager, and a little bit about the framework for that and where that's going. So I think Hugues is going to start by kind of setting the table for us, giving us a sense of what this is all about. Derek's going to talk about their involvement with one particular manager engagement. And then Hugues going to talk a little bit about where the project's going. So I'll turn it over to the two of you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. Hello, everyone. So my name is Hugues Letourneau, and I've been at Share for about just a little over 10 years. And I would just like to take a few minutes, just under 5 minutes, to talk about why we have developed a focus around this concept of asset manager accountability. Then describe what the framework is, how we analyze asset managers, and then ask Peter. Oh, sorry, let me just see if I can change.
Okay, just change the setting. I don't know if that makes any difference. Wonderful. An opportunity to get involved as well for everyone on this call. So I'm just going to put up a slide here for a few seconds. So basically what we have on this slide is essentially it's demonstrating the importance of large asset management firms in global capital markets. And it's interesting to kind of approach this on kind of a bit of a time series in some ways, because over the last, and these numbers are in trillions as well. So we were talking millions a few minutes ago, billions. So now here we're looking at trillions on this chart. The GDP of Canada is around 2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. So these numbers are sort of significantly bigger than that. The blue line is pension fund capital. So essentially there's thousands of pension funds around the world. In 2013, they had around 26 trillions of assets under management. And there was about a 46% growth over 10 years. And that went up to 38 trillion. In the interim, what we have seen is there has been a concentration of assets among the large global asset managers. What I put down here is actually the top 5 global asset managers. In 2013, they had $10 trillion of assets under management, and there was a 150% growth over just under 10 years to 25 trillion. So You have 38 trillion on one side, which is pension capital, thousands of pension funds, some smaller ones and some larger ones. And just on the right side there, the 25 trillion, it's 5 asset managers, only 5 asset managers. What this means, what it translates into is that these managers are often the largest shareholders in companies around the world. The big three, which are State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard, are the largest shareholders in 88% of the S&P 500 firms in the United States. And this trend has been termed what we call asset manager capitalism. So for some of you that are kind of historically minded, you might remember that in the 60s and 70s, we talked about pension fund socialism. Then this evolved into the concept of pension fund capitalism. And in recent years, we've started kind of unpacking the increasing clout and influence of asset managers. And of course, what happens is asset managers tend to, yes, hold these large ownership stakes in companies. When it comes to engaging, when it comes to proxy voting, they wield a lot of influence. A few words here on the Canadian landscape. In Canada, and these numbers now, it's the same numbers, but it's in Canadian dollars. In Canada, the top 5 asset managers hold the equivalent of 66% of pension fund assets. So again, we're talking sort of hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadian pension funds of all sizes, and 5 asset managers on the other hand. And there is a mix of foreign and homegrown asset managers. Some of the largest ones include BlackRock, of course, but we also have the asset management arm of Canada's largest banks. So we can think of TD-AM, RBC Global Asset Management, and so on. So essentially, this is just to show that the concentration of assets is also reflected in kind of the Canadian investment chain, and in the relation between Canadian asset owners and asset managers. How have we gone about analyzing asset manager? What I would say is that when we started doing the collaborative engagements, where we brought kind of asset owners, pension funds mainly, although we are broadening that out to religious investors, foundations, to build kind of a broader asset owner coalition. So when we started out, I would say we analyzed asset managers a little bit more anecdotally, but we thought there was, I guess, a need to develop a framework. So we went about doing that, and we kind of divided the analysis into 4 blocks, which I'm just going to describe very briefly here. The first one is to look at what we call the stewardship framework. So when you look at the asset manager, what do they say about ESG, like their engagement activities, their proxy voting, how they engage with regulators? So that is one kind of angle of analysis. The second one, it's moving from policies to actual practices. So practices in public equities. So how are they doing engagement? What are their priorities? And how are they voting proxies as well, right? So using their voice at company annual general meetings. Thirdly, a lot of asset managers, even like the public equity focused managers, have private market activities. So we thought it was important to look at what are they doing in private markets? Because while there may be some maturity in public equities, public markets tend to be a private market portfolio tends to have less investments, but with larger ownership stakes, and therefore like more influence. So that's the third building block. And the last one is to look at how they are doing advocacy, policy advocacy. When there are strategic consultations, sometimes asset managers will send responses. We can think of the International Sustainability Standards Board recently. A lot of asset managers around the world sent responses to that. So how are they responding to these consultations, and how are they utilizing their clout essentially to advocate and to have an impact on the policy processes? So this is how I guess we have built the framework around why and how we analyze the managers. And well, I'm gonna sort of pause here, and we're gonna come back in a few minutes to how everyone can get involved into some of these engagements. So I think I'll turn it over to Derek.
Well, I can speak to I guess one of the arrangements, or one of the initiatives that you put together with Fiera that I participated in. The church, the United Church, has quite a significant relationship with Fiera, not only on the pension side, but also on the foundation, on our foundation, and also in the sort of church treasury funds. So they're a significant relationship for the church. So I participated in the sort of this collaborative investment manager engagement with organized by Hugh, and put together a very strong sort of agenda with them. So my experience, and just overall, I thought it was a very positive experience with Fiera. And I think they touched on, I think I'm just kind of checking my notes as to sort of the topics of conversation. The share talked about sort of their internal DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, and they did. I think the committee was, or at least the people who were in the engagement were relatively, I think, sort of pleased with it. That there's some initiatives and there's some goals on the part of Fiera to sort of improve their diversity, equity, inclusion. I think, and then the next topic we sort of turned to was around investment stewardship, in particular around sort of how they're handling their proxy voting. One of the features, or well, Fiera's a bit of an interesting organization in the sense that it's almost an amalgamation of different investment managers that they've sort of bought up, and each investment manager may at least on the public side is responsible for voting their own proxies. I think the engagement was pleasantly surprised that there is some control about how Fiera handles those proxy voting. So investment manager, there is some uniformity about how they vote their proxies, and I think I think that with the sort of the process, again, I think the people on the engagement call were sort of pleased with the process that Fiera is following, and the fact that there is one, and sort of if any manager chooses to deviate from their set policy, then they sort of explain it, and there's some negotiation that goes on there, or at least some discussion that goes on there. Fiera did touch on it has made a net zero asset managers commitment, though only a small percentage of their assets are in scope. I'm seeing this, a lot of managers will make this commitment, but you'll find that your portfolio is out of scope. So I think that's something to be mindful when you do hear a manager making a net zero asset managers commitment. But then again, Fiera sort of is monitoring it. At the time, they said it had moved from 7% of their assets to 11.5% of their assets are now in scope to be net zero aligned. The net zero asset managers alliance is a commitment by managers to have their assets have zero emissions by 2050, and I know it's a long way away, but they do have to set interim goals along. And Fiera has set those interim goals, and I don't have them at hand, but I think they're making sure that they're sort of have a commitment to sort of improve that over time and monitoring it. What else can I say? They've also joined Climate Action 100 Plus, which is a more of a broad-based U.S. focused sort of focusing on certain U.S. Energy producers in the U.S. to sort of get them to move on climate change initiatives. I think there's a Canadian version of that called CEC Climate. I'm sorry, I just know the acronym, of which Share is a member, and a key organizing party in that organization. But it's focused on Canadian companies. And I think there was some follow up with Fiera to make sure that they would look to join that as well. Overall, I think from my understanding, the engagement was a sort of positive experience. I thought there was some thoughtful conversation. I think there was the members came away feeling that Fiera is doing something and moving in the right direction. As I say, always at the end of with Fiera is you have to be. For us in the pension plan, we have two mandates, one on the fixed income side and one on the equity side, and they both have different approaches to how they incorporate ESG. So I would say as much as your Fiera, you might find, given their sort of the manager they have underneath or silo might have different approach. So I would sort of encourage you to sort of delve into sort of your specific managers or what they do specifically. Just don't rely on what Fiera as a company is telling you. So, but as I say, at the overall, I think it was a very positive experience in terms of this particular engagement. That's all I got.
Maybe we'll take just a moment to ask if there are any questions for Derek about his participation in the engagement before Oog goes on and talks about some next steps and opportunities. Is there anyone who'd like to ask Derek a question? I guess the one question that comes to mind for me is, were you concerned that joining a collective engagement with your manager might upset the relationship you have with your manager? Because those relationships are pretty tight, and the managers are pretty concerned about that relationship. And did you hesitate to get involved with others to do it together?
I think I think I have I don't have any problem upsetting an investment manager. Fiera would tell you that too. So yeah, I honestly think the more people get together, the larger the voice, and I think religious investors sort of punch above their weight in terms of when speaking generally about on issues. So I think the larger the group, the larger the voice, the better the result and the better the impact in the discussion.
Great. Before Oog goes on, any other questions anyone has for Derek? Moira, you have to unmute.
How many investors were represented in this meeting?
I don't know the number.
Oog, can you
Maybe
help
I can
out?
just jump in. I think we had about 20, but what's interesting perhaps is just the types of investors. I mean, we had universities, we had pension plans, religious investors, a foundation as well. So it was a very large swath of asset owners. So yeah, we were really happy to sort of to be able to show the power of asset owners collectively.
Okay. Anyone else before we go on?
Is there a move with the rise of engagement strategies to undivest from fossil fuels to become more aligned with things like climate engagement? Curious if that's on your radar at all with the United Church.
Well, I think that, as you know, I'm not sure who's speaking, but the Treasury Fund and I believe the foundation both have divested of fossil fuels in their investment portfolio. The pension plan hasn't done so. I think as we look at our climate engagement goals, there'll be targets along the way to sort of make sure to sort of achieve lower emissions, but I don't think they'll be necessarily ever. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where the pension plan will exclude fossil fuels.
It might be helpful when we're thinking about engagement to clarify. So the engagement that Bill was referring to, I think, is the engagement with companies in the portfolio. And this is an engagement with the managers. So both the term engagement's common, but this is specifically, in some ways, using the same approach as corporate engagement, but as clients with your managers. Okay, well, Oog, why don't you help us out now by telling us where we can see where this is going next.
Yeah, thank you. So just briefly, everyone, we have an exciting opportunity, and for those of you that might be tech-minded, you can feel free to just take a photo of this to get all the details. We are, oh, sorry. So we are organizing another engagement with a Canadian asset manager using the same template as we did with Fiera. And this time the manager, I mean, it's the first time we do an engagement like this with the asset management arms of one of Canada's large banks. So it's a different, I guess, dynamic, I would say. But the way we are doing this is that we have drafted a letter that we intend on sending to RBC Global Asset Manager. And we are currently gathering signatures from clients of RBC GAM. We have some signatories from the pension fund side. We have a few foundations. I believe we have some religious investors as well. We're still gathering signatures until November 10th. So if you happen to use RBC GAM in any portfolio, really, whether in any asset class, I would say, whether it's fixed income, public equities, you can consider joining this. If you either click on the link, and I can also post the link here in the chat, you're going to be sent to a Google form where you can see a little bit more about how we are coordinating this engagement. But the idea is gathering signatures until November 10th, hopefully send a letter the following week to RBC GAM, and we'd like to organize a meeting with all of the clients who have signed the letter and RBC GAM before Christmas is our hope. And again, yes, the idea is to push RBC GAM on climate issues, on human and labor rights, and on Indigenous reconciliation as well. Like, these are the three broad strands that we are analyzing. And we are focusing here on ESG stewardship. So how are they engaging? How are they voting proxies? How are they engaging with policymakers as well? So that's all going to be kind of discussed at the engagement meeting. So yeah, happy to answer any questions.
The link is in the is already in the chat. Amanda put the link in there for us. And Thomas McCauley, Tom, do you have a question? You have to unmute.
I do. There we go. Thank you. Question, Hugh. You talk about RBC Global Asset Management. What about if the investment manager is using RBC as the custodian? And the reason I'm asking that question is early this year, with the support of Anthony and someone else whose name escapes me right now, I actually, before I retired from the investment committee or the endowment fund committee at Bloor Street, engaged our investment manager in a conversation talking about how do we split out our parts of a shared portfolio and vote our shares, kind of like what BlackRock does in the States. So are you interested in anybody signing on who uses RBC as a custodian, as distinct from an asset manager?
Great question. Thank you, Thomas. It's the second time in 2 weeks that I get this question. I will say the concept, of course, with the engagements has always been sort of, if you are using the asset manager, because the idea is that the asset manager takes the money and invests it. Custodian is my understanding, of course. I gravitated a lot more around the asset management space than custodian, but it's essentially more of a record keeping function and role, if I understand well. We hadn't opened it to sort of the asset owners that might use RBC as a custodian, but I just might need to do a little bit more thinking, and I need to understand a little bit better what I guess the client leverage if one uses RBC custodian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did learn through the process, because we asked the tough questions, mostly just to see what the response would come back. And basically, there is no capability in Canada, as I understand currently, to split anything out like that. BlackRock does it in the States as long as your account is 9 figures and higher. I believe they'll go to the trouble, because of course there's a cost and time associated with it. So I would recommend that you spend no time researching this. However, pen it down for something for perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, when you focus on the asset manager would be my suggestion. I just thought I'd ask. So
Yeah,
Great. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I thought maybe I could add a little color here. We use RBC as a custody, and I think what you're referring to is having separate accounts. Like for instance, we're talking about Fiera, our global equity, and actually our bonds are both separate accounts. We actually we hold the assets in the name of the pension fund of the United Church of Canada. If it's and RBC is the custodian and holds the assets in our name. Control is a funny thing, but I mean, there are assets. They don't have any rights to vote those shares. We have our own proxy voting. We use shares proxy voting service to vote those shares, our shares. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but I don't view the custodian has any power over from an ESG perspective. It's all with the manager or us. So I'm not sure if I wouldn't say we don't use ourselves. We don't use RBC GAMS as an asset manager. So even though we have RBC as a custodian, I don't think we would participate in this particular engagement.
Thanks very much. I know, Oog, I think you have to leave at 11, and we've hit that. So I want to say thank you very much to you. And Amanda Watkins is on the call. So if before the end of today we have any other questions, I think Amanda will be able to help you with that. And again, a great segue, because we're now going to talk about proxy voting, about how you deal with pooled funds. And so with that, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Duff from the Sisters of Mercy to kick it off and tell us a little bit about the process they've gone through to deal with proxy voting issues. and you're muted.
Where's the presentation? Can we have your side put up the presentation, Peter?
Okay, yeah, we'll put it up. It'll just take a sec. Stephanie, can you share that with us?
Yes, pulling it up now.
Okay, so just going to share a little bit about our journey with the proxy voting policy and how things unfold. If we could move to the next slide. So a little bit of a history of how this unfolded. We had a small local investment portfolio, and it moved from a managed account to an advisor account. And because of this change, we started to receive ballots from the companies in which we were shareholders that included shareholder proposals. So, it's not a huge portfolio, but we do hold the shares directly. And so I started to get all these proposals come across my desk. And, well, first thing I need to understand, how do you assess these? And it was, to be honest, it was a bit above my pay grade. So I reached out to Peter to have a chat to see how we could, how we could better understand these proposals. Were they valid? And how could we determine how we should vote? And what was interesting was that some of the proposals we received were share proposals that Share had made on behalf of their members. Now, we had seen them we knew about the proposals from Share and the different information that we had received. So we looked to Share for advice on how to evaluate the proposals. We landed in a place where we would either vote in favor of, we would withhold our vote, or we would just vote against the proposal. What was really interesting, almost every share proposal that came in, the management of the company, other than the proposals that management was putting out, was asking us to vote against them. And it was kind of set up that, you very quickly, carte blanche, tick the box and off you go, which didn't really want to do that without understanding. Next slide. So once we kind of understood what the proposals were about, it was pretty easy to vote them. It's actually a website. You go in, you make your vote, you can change it. It tells you which ones are coming up, and so it was pretty easy, and it was a great learning opportunity. But there was a huge aha moment, and we were like, well, how are our investment managers on our larger portfolios voting the proxies held in segregated accounts? Because what we noted was there was some overlap in the equity shares that were being held. So, and then we were keenly interested on the share proposals, like proposals that Share had been doing on behalf of its members. And then the really big discovery was that it was possible that our investment managers were voting against share proposals, as well as others that we wanted to support. So we probably should have known this. We had received enough. We just never connected the dots. And, we're members of Share, we're paying Share to do this work. And then our investment manager could have been voting against it. So the investment committee had big challenges with that. So we decided that the next immediate step would be to ensure that this didn't happen. How could we prevent it? So we began with the share proposals. There was too many, and so we said, we're going to focus on the share proposals and let's see where that takes us. And so we advised the managers that we wanted to vote in support of these proposals. So any proposals that Share had been doing with any of the companies that we held shares in, we wanted our managers to vote in support of those proposals. That was the first step. Next slide, please. So the investment managers weren't used to this type of activity, and we were met with initial surprise and a bit of resistance due to our lack of policy, because we hadn't actually written a policy and advised our investment managers that this is what we wanted them to do specifically. You know, we had lots of things in the policy, but we didn't specifically say how we wanted certain shares to be voted. In the journey, we discovered that our investment managers, especially the larger ones, they contract out the proxy voting to a company called ISS. And because of this, they would need lead time to vote the proxy according to our instructions. They were asking for 3 weeks lead time for if we were providing specific instructions. Well, it was okay, but we could kind of stumbled in this a little bit, so we didn't always have 3 weeks. So with the assistance of Share, Anthony Shane in particular, we created a communication which listed each proposal and our instructions. And we also, with the support of Anthony, what would happen was he had the proposal, he had the circular and links to them. So he would send them to me. I'd embed them in my communications with investment managers, and then we would tell the investment manager that's how we want to vote the shares that you hold on our behalf. Then we took it a step deeper, and because there were some, because of timing, that we missed. And so we asked the investment managers to provide us information on how they voted their proxies for other investors. So we kind of said, this is how we want ours done. But now we want to tell you to tell us specifically how you voted for other shareholders, for your other investors. Like, what was your philosophy? And if they didn't support the proposal, to provide us with an explanation as to why they didn't support it. So one example of it is there was a pharmaceutical proposal that Kevin had worked on, and it was about executive compensation for the CEO, because the way it works is they exclude law cases from prior periods from the CEO's compensation package. And there was a proposal that basically said, no, we want this to be counted into the executive compensation. And that particular one of our investment managers had voted against it. And so we wanted to know why they voted against it. And it had to do with the reason they voted against it had to do with that the current CEO might not necessarily have had anything to do with the loss or the lawsuit, but that's a weak argument, and we countered that. But at the same time, we were raising the level of our expectations with them. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, once we got through proxy voting season, we had to come up with a policy. Now we wrote a policy that would be embedded in our existing investment committee policy. And to be honest, we had permission from other organizations to use their work. So we didn't reinvent the wheel and go through, we looked at what's out there, how can that be modified to meet the congregation's needs. So the policy became, the congregation believes that expressing its opinion via shareholder votes on management proposal is an important part of its responsible investing approach. Investment managers will be responsible for voting proxies on behalf of the congregation, with ESG factors being given the highest consideration and providing reporting on the voting. The congregation is a member of SHARE, and from time to time, this organization will make shareholder proposals on behalf of its members. In these situations and others, the congregation will provide direction in writing 3 weeks in advance of the voting date on how it wishes their proxies to be voted. So now we've clearly established with the investment managers what our expectations are, and we're using their guideline, the 3 weeks that they want the advance notice. Now, I have personal opinions on the 3 weeks, and I probably shouldn't share those. Knowing that I voted the proxies myself directly for the smaller portfolio, honestly, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to do it. So I'm not really sure why I got to have 3 weeks, but if that's what they want, we'll work with it. Then, in consultation with Peter and another group that he had been working with, we had principles to support this policy, and we embedded them in Appendix B. And the reason for that is the principles can change from time to time, while as the policy might not necessarily need to change. So we wanted to have the flexibility, and Appendix is a lot easier to change than the policy. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to read out each one of those. These were shared with us, and then we modified them for our needs. And, basically, they represent the broader impact of what the congregation feels, their ESG, and how we should be managing that overall. So the first one deals with the broader impact on society, the environment, and the economy, and recognizing that our portfolio is the congregation's income stream. So we need to be mindful about how, and while we need the income, we don't want to be investing in a manner that's going to be harmful to any of the above, either society or the environment or the economy. We want to respect the international laws. A lot of that work has been done, so I think that it's important for us to conduct our investing in accordance with those laws. We wanted to recognize that the board of directors is accountable to the shareholders. So each of those companies, their board is responsible to us, and the strategic direction and strong, successful oversight of the management depends upon the broad skill, independence, and diversity. So again, we want to see the broader philosophy embedded into our proxy voting policy. We wanted to recognize Indigenous rights, and so it's very specifically written into the principles. We wanted also, we already work with the human rights and workers' rights, and they're very well established, so we don't need to redo all of that. So again, it's embedded directly into the principles. And governance and the impact that it can have on the income, we wanted, again, it embedded into the principles. And of course, climate change, which is such a huge thing for all of us, and the need to have the companies we invest in be moving in the right directions. So again, it's embedded directly into the principles. And basically, that's where we landed. Next slide, please. So this scenario there are three possible scenarios for voting proxies. And of course, it's your own proxies and then managers in a segregated account. And then there's managers for voting proxies in a pooled account. The above speaks specifically to your own proxies and managers' proxies. And I'm going to let Peter speak a little bit about managers voting proxies in pooled accounts, because you don't have the same kinds of access. So Peter.
Thank you. That was a great run through on the first two of these bullets, the proxies that you vote yourself, and some of you do. I know that it's not as common, but some of you are receiving the ballots and voting them yourselves. Many of you are have voting power, but delegate that to your manager. So Elizabeth's given a very clear picture of the process they went through to try to take back some of the authority to direct that voting. But the third one, which is very common, is to use pooled funds. And so if you're in pooled funds, the manager owns the votes. You just own units in the pool. You don't own the underlying shares. So the right to vote is entirely in their hands. And so Stephanie, if you could just pop up the next slide. I just want to talk briefly about pooled fund voting. So as I said, pooled fund investors can't direct how their proxies are voted. So unlike what Elizabeth's arranged with their managers, that doesn't work because those proxies are voted at the manager's discretion. But there are things you can do. The first is you can tell your managers how you hope they will vote. The second is if you have a policy like the one that the principles that Elizabeth outlined, if you've developed something like that, you can share that with your pooled fund manager so that at least they're aware of how you define your interests. And then finally, at the end of the season, you can ask for the same kinds of reporting that Elizabeth was asking for their segregated funds. You can ask for that same reporting on your pooled funds, and you can go right in and look at specific votes on climate change, on human rights, workers' rights, and other issues of concern, reconciliation, and see how they voted and talk to them about those votes and ask them for their rationale. And if you don't feel that they voted in your best interest, to discuss that with them. So that can be quite powerful. And I will say years ago in our experience at the Task Force on the Churches and Corporate Responsibility, sometimes speaking up and telling your manager how you hope they will vote on a issue will swing the entire pool vote. So it can be quite powerful. And then finally, making proxy voting a part of manager hiring and accountability. So if you're hiring a new manager, asking them about how they're voting and what their guidelines are, what their voting record is, and factoring that into your decision. So are there any, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If there are any questions of Elizabeth about the process she went through or other proxy voting questions. We can take down the slide. There we go. And again, I can't see everybody, so do any of you have questions? While we're waiting, I will mention that the earlier question that was raised about what's called pass-through voting is there are situations where pooled fund owners have negotiated the right to direct the proportion of the pool that they own in their own with their own policy. That is becoming quite increasingly common in the United Kingdom. It's starting to happen in the United States. And there's at least one large pension fund in Canada that has negotiated that right. But it is not widespread yet in Canada. But it may be coming, and it could be quite powerful because so many of us are using pooled funds now in order to get the economies of scale.
One of the things that was an interesting learning opportunity too was this company ISS, and how the larger companies are contracting out the proxy voting to ISS. And so I think there's work that we have to figure out with ISS, because they seem to have a lot of power consolidated in there. So one of the questions that we'll be pursuing is, how are you instructing your ISS, in particular for your religious investors, because their value set and goals, well, income is important, and they're using it for mission and to achieve climate change, human rights, those kinds of things. So how does ISS define a religious investor? Like, is their voting model different for people who belong in that category? Now, I think we all should belong in that category, but I also recognize that we're not. You only got to read the current ESG media stuff that's happening, and that there's dissent there. But we want to ask the investment managers, how are they building out for that segment of an investor? Because this ISS is a growing power, and how much detail does the investment manager pay to the proxy votings, or are they just giving it over to ISS to do? And so it's a big question. There's a lot of unknowns there.
It's a great question, and it's in fact, ISS has what they call their benchmark policy, which is what your manager is likely using, but they also have a Catholic policy. They have a sustainability policy. They have a policy for labor funds. And some managers subscribe to more than one. And some managers, rather than using the benchmark policy, for example, will use the sustainability policy, which has a much higher voting support for climate change proposals, for example. So a question you can ask is, which of the ISS policies do you follow? And do we have a choice? Because you might have the option to designate one of the other ISS policies as the one that rules your voting. So that's an option. Yeah, Derek.
I was going to chime in that there's ISS, there's also Glass Lewis, which I'm not sure which one's bigger in terms of proxy voting, but those are the two organizations that come up. So there's it's not just ISS, there's also Glass Lewis out there that I suspect, I'm not sure what the market share between them, but they probably control about over 90% of the proxy voting.
That's right. Yes, ISS is much larger, about 3 times larger than Glass Lewis. Okay. And together they do control most voting. There is a Canadian service provider partly owned by Share called GIR. But if you're interested, you please get in touch, and I'm always happy to talk proxy voting. But we need to wrap up now, and we have just a couple of quick announcements. I wanted to first to invite Bill Hatch to give a quick note about an event he has coming up.
Thanks, Peter. My name is Bill Hatch. I'm a lay collaborator with the Jesuits of Canada, serving on the Finance and Investment Committees. I'd like to share with you about a new group of Canadian faith-based asset stewards who are interested in or have taken the first steps of their impact investing journeys and would like to collaborate with others. It's an informal group that co-facilitated by myself and Yusuf Najmi from Catherine Donnelly, who's also on the call today, I believe. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, November 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. And to RSVP or learn more, you can email me. I'll type my email in the chat as well. And look forward to hearing from you. Yusuf, anything you want to add to this? You're muted, I think. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just want to say that this is an informal group. We are all learning about impact investing, and we want to ensure that any hurdles that investors do feel with regards to the process of finding impact investing deals, due diligence, topics in impact investing around impact measurement, policy statements that folks want to learn. We just want to bring all the faith-based organizations in Canada together like the US has done. We have learned a lot from our partners in the US and want to replicate that for religious or faith-based organizations here.
Thank you both very much. So you've got some information there. Bill's going to put his email in the chat as well. And it sounds like we're all welcome to join then. Before I say final thank yous, Amanda Watkins from Share is going to tell you about 2 events coming up through Share.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Oh, if it'll let me. Here we go. There we go. Can you all see this? Yeah, hi everyone. Great to chat with you all. I just wanted to share a few event opportunities that are coming up with Share. So the first one is taking place on November 29th, and it's our webinar on policy advocacy and the role of investors, particularly in the context of climate policy. So we'll be joined by 2 different speakers. One is from PERC, which is the Pension and Investment Research Consultants based out of the UK. They'll be speaking to us about some of their learning lessons, and engaging on big policy decisions and what we can take from that and bring into a Canadian context. I know pensions is in their name, but they do work with a variety of asset owners, and we'll be bringing quite a diverse perspective to the conversation as well. We'll also be joined by someone from the Canadian Climate Institute, and they'll be sharing some background research on some ongoing policy decisions that are happening right now in the world of climate, and how investors can collaborate to move the needle on some of those or just learn more about it. So this webinar is open to anyone in our networks and beyond. So it's something you can feel free to pass along as well. And whether you're just starting to learn about how you can be involved in policy, or if you already have work on the go and are seeking more opportunities, we'll be talking about both at the webinar. And I can just paste a link in the chat after this. And the other event that I wanted to share is the save the date for the Investor Summit, which will be taking place from March 5th to 7th in 2024 in Vancouver. We'll be returning to the theme of the power of many, revisiting some of the ideas that have come up over the last few years. Definitely going to have a big focus again on climate, reconciliation, human rights. We'll also have opportunity again for the caucus conversations. So chance for religious investors to connect in person, as well as our foundations, depending on where you land. You can attend one or both, but there will be opportunities to connect and collaborate and meet others. The early bird registration for the Investor Summit will be going live in November, so keep an eye out for that. We'll circulate that with the networks once it's ready, but something to keep in your calendars, and we definitely hope to see you all there.
Thank you very much.
Let's see, let me stop sharing.
We'll make sure those get out, those links I'll get out to you after the webinar. So I just want to say thank you to all our presenters. The Ursuline process, the asset manager engagement with Fiera, the proxy voting, the Sisters of Mercy, all very, very interesting, very relevant, certainly for me, and I hope for all of you. So I want to say a special thank you to those who took time to prepare and make remarks to us. We will hold future webinars on other topics, so please stay in touch with us. If you have any questions about participation in activities or ideas for things religious investors can do together, please feel free to reach out to me. And I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar and hopefully meet some of you in person at the forum, at the summit. So thank you very much. Thank you to Stephanie for doing all the tech work behind to make this flow smoothly, and to the rest of the SHARE staff for their support.